Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Bernard. I'm a bookseller here at Politics and Prose. On behalf of the owners and of the staff, I'd like to welcome all of you to your favorite bookstore for this evening's event. As you may already know, we host hundreds of in-person events along with our partnered and supported events, trips, and classes, some of which are being held at our branches at the Union Market and at the Wharf. So please check our website for a full list. Housekeeping before we start, please turn off or silence your cell phones so that we don't disturb the proceedings. For the Q&A, please remember to step up to the microphone over here by the pillar before asking your questions so that everyone can hear and enjoy the conversation, but to also ensure that it is recorded. For those of you who want to buy copies of the books, we are selling them at the registers up front. We will be doing a signing after the Q&A, so if you'd like to get your book signed, please, again, line up by the pillar over here. And if you want your books personalized, we will be coming by with Post-its. So just have your books ready for us. And lastly, once the event is complete, we ask that you fold up your chairs, lean them against something sturdy to help us out a bit. All right, I'm honored to be introducing tonight's Night in Translation, which is being held to celebrate the publication of Miguel Avero's Aguas, Waters, translated by Jona Colson, and Samira Negrouche's Solio, translated by Nancy Naomi Carlson. So here to introduce the writer and the translators for tonight, we have Carolyn Bach, who is the co-president of the Washington Writers Publishing House and PNP alumni, who the Washington Writers Publishing House, by the way, is the oldest cooperative literary publishing house in the United States, which is celebrating their 50th anniversary next year. So I am sure we will be seeing them again next year. So, Carolyn Bach.
Thank you, Bernard. And thank you everybody at PNP who helped organize this night. Just not only Bernard, but Lily, Katie, Ramsey, Alyssa, Alan, Susan Cole. They have just a great group here. And I really think that only in DC and only in a bookstore like Politics and Prose would you have a translation night for poetry. So thank you, Politics and Prose. As Bernard said, I'm the co-president and the prose editor at the Washington Writers Publishing House. And I have to confess, I only write and speak in American English. However, I'd love to read works in translation because I often discover new writers, ideas, crafts through reading and translation. And that was certainly the case with Aguas and Waters by Miguel Avero, translated by Jona Colson. I was amazed to learn that this collection was 10 years, a decade in the making. And we, all of us at WWPH, were thrilled when Miguel said he would make his first trip to the United States to be here with us and celebrate the publication of his first book in English translation. And he's just back from New York City with stories to tell. But about Aguas and Waters, a recent review in Mayday noted that Aguas Waters is obsessed with dichotomies, the relationship between earth and space, the thin film between strangers and people we think we know, the struggle between naked truth and blissful ignorance, the heartache between presence and absence. This reviewer also noted that the poems were deftly translated, making them very accessible. And I have to say, I agree. I found these poems to be film noirish, sexy, intimate, with nature and more. But you're in for a treat. So, brief introductions, and I'm going to hand it over to the poets and to our on-site translator, Kathleen Wheaton, here in the front row, who is also a prose writer. She's the former president of WWPH, the current head of fiction, and a 2024 to 2026 Stegner Fellow at Stanford University. So just a big shout out to Kathleen, who will be translating tonight if need be. So brief intros, like I said, of the poets, and then we'll have the poetry flow. So first, Miguel Avero, who was born in Montevideo, Uruguay. He is a poet, narrator, essayist, teacher, and researcher. He's the author of 10 books of poetry and prose. His works have been translated into the French as well as now in English. He'll be joined by Jona Colson, who is an educator and poet. In addition to writing his own poetry, including the award-winning collection from WWPH Said Through Glass, and translating from the Spanish the poetry of Miguel Avero. He is a professor at Montgomery College, where he teaches English as a second language. And he's the other co-president at the Washington Writers Publishing House with me. So together, they have published WWPH's first book in translation. I will share with you, it will not be our last. We are going to do this on a biennial or every other year basis. So if there's anybody who is a translator out there, talk to us. But this night of translation is not all about Aguas and waters. We asked a longtime pressmate and a friend of WWPH to join us, Nancy Naomi Carlson. She is a poet, translator, essayist, and winner of the 2022 Oxford Weidenfeld Translation Prize from Oxford University. She's the author of 15 titles, 10 translated. Her second poetry collection, as well as her co-translation of Wendy Gara's book, hopefully saying that right. As I said, I speak only American English. I'm born in the Bronx, but only American English. But her co-translation of this writer's work was noted in the New York Times. She is the recipient of 2 translation grants from the National Endowment for the Arts and decorated by the French government with the academic palms. Carlson has also earned 2 doctoral degrees and is the translation editor for On the Seawall. Her work has appeared in the American Poetry Review, the Georgia Review, Paris Review, Poetry, and the Writer's Chronicle. I have to also add that in 1997, she won the Washington Writers Publishing House's Poetry Prize for King's Highway. So a longtime press member and a good friend. But first, I'm going to hand this over to Miguel Avero and Jona Colson for Aguas, Waters.
¿Está bien así? Sí.
Hola.
So we're going to sit a little close to each other. So welcome, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. Bienvenidos a todos. I see some familiar faces as well as some new faces, so it's wonderful that we're here to celebrate translation. So we're here to celebrate Aguas by Miguel Avero, and I translated, and it just came out in May. So again, thank you, and also again, congratulations to Nancy for all of her work and everything she's been doing. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you to Policing the Prose for hosting. You've been very kind and very supportive of Washington Writers Publishing House, and we appreciate that. So we're going to sit here and read some poems for you in English and in Spanish, if that's okay. Is that all right, guys? Yeah? Sound good? Okay. So thank you to Washington Writers Publishing House for believing in this book. I mean, I know I'm co-president, so it's a little bit of nepotism, but like not really. Like it was approved by the board, so we're okay. And to Caroline Bach for everything you've done, Caroline. You know you're fabulous, even though you don't say you are. And Kathleen Wheaton for your editorial eye and all your wonderful suggestions and translation. And of course for Miguel for your poems. Otherwise there would be no book and no celebration. Y por eso sus poemas a la No había nada sin ti. Sin vos, ya está bien, ¿no? Okay, so how many, are there any Spanish speakers here tonight? Can I see Spanish speakers? And yeah, okay. I know some people. So it's good. So we're going to do like a little bit of half and half for our part of it anyway. So if you don't understand something in English, you'll hear it in Spanish. In Spanish, no, then you'll hear it in English, okay? So all over will be okay. All right, just as a little preamble, so many people ask how we got started with this book. I took a poetry workshop. Un momento, como que. I took a poetry workshop at Gettysburg College with Sydney Wade, and she was telling me that her friend Jessie Lee was doing a anthology of younger Uruguayan poets. And I told her, well, I studied Spanish. I've been translating some Spanish literature. And she sent my name to Jessie Lee, and she sent me a message back, and I sent her some poems, and she sent me messages back. And she said, yeah, let's do this. And then she matched me with Miguel Avero. And I got his first two books. His first book of poetry, Arca de aserrin, Sawdust Arc. And then the next book was called La Pieza, The Room. And so I translated 10 poems for her anthology, and then I just kept translating. I just kept doing it. And initially I had 2 books of poetry, and then Jessie Lee suggested that we do a selected work. And that's what you have here. So it's a selected work of his first 2 books of poems in Aguas. So sorry, I'm doing a little bit of in both here. Forgive me. So we're going to read 11 poems. Actually, going to be 9 poems. Forgive me. 9 poems. The first will be in Spanish first, and then English, and then we'll do English to Spanish, so that we end with Spanish. ¿Ya? ¿Algo? ¿Tú quieres
No,
decir algo más?
solo,
Para tu voz.
solo decir que it's a pleasure for me to be with all. Y nada, agradecerles a todos por todo lo que está ocurriendo en este momento y que bueno, que sea una buena lectura.
Sí.
¿Empiezo yo? ¿O?
Sí.
Sí.
He's very happy to be here. We're all very happy to be here. So we'll start reading some poems, yeah? So we have a list. So we're going to start Spanish to English. So empieza con Aguas, ¿sí? Y se dice el título también. El título también. Se dice a frente que no todo.
Aguas. Agua en la mañana alquitranada, o en la noche que cubre de cartones el amanecer. Agua en los tejados anidando. Agua en la explanada donde olvidaron sus agujeros negros las estrellas. Agua incesante, agua de a ratos. Agua en el reflejo que descubre el ojo en el espejo. Agua en la tinta de los versos que no se escribirán nunca. Agua rebasando el vaso frío y ahogado con una gota inestimable. Agua en el revuelto río de nuestra paz interior, donde jamás caminaremos, donde ni cenizas quedan. Agua acampando en torno al último fogón.
So this is the title poem of the collection Aguas, Waters. Water in the tar-dark morning, or the night that covers the sunrise with boxes. Water nesting on rooftops. Water in the plaza where the stars forget their black holes. Constant water, occasional water. Water in the reflection that discovers the eye in the mirror. Water in the ink of the verses that will never be written. Water overflowing the cold glass and drowned with an immeasurable drop. Water in the troubled river of our inner peace, where we will never walk, where no ashes remain. Water settling around the last fire. Thank you.
Gracias.
And we will also, there are a few poems where we want to talk a little bit about the translation just a little bit, maybe some words that happen, but we're also very, very happy to take any questions at the end. So, el segundo, ¿no?
Bien, vamos con Mar Descascarado. Este poema, capaz que se puede decir, es el primero, creo que escribí de toda la colección. Sí, es como la piedra fundamental.
Yeah, this is the first poem that he wrote that was published from the collection. The cornerstone. Oh, I like that. The cornerstone. I didn't catch that, Kathleen. Thank you. The cornerstone poem of the collection. Yeah.
Mar descascarado. Se desintegra la noche sobre el resplandor de los paraguas, sobre las innumerables pieles poco a poco endurecidas. En los pliegues de la estremecida brisa, aire y agua son lo mismo. Individuos apurados pisoteando los espejos perplejos de la calle. Nocturna luz que un humo gris ha suplantado. La mueca del hombre en cada esquina reunida ante un cielo desmoronado tantas veces. El niño y su sonrisa tras una ventana azul como el sueño de los peces. Y encima de la tierra un mar descascarado.
Oy. So this was a little difficult to translate. ¿Cómo dice otra vez eso?
Descascarado.
¿Y qué significa para vos?
Es algo,
What does that mean, that word?
es algo como que va perdiendo la cáscara, ¿no?
Yeah, see, that was really strange. Say to like if you have a nut and like you shell the nut. Like, oh, okay. So like you have, okay. So let's say you have a peanut and you shell the peanut. That's what that word means. So think about applying that to like the sea or the ocean. I had no idea. So I was like, okay, what am I going to say here? So I just said breaking open. Is that okay? All right, it worked. I tried. I know. It has shells, but not really, but I tried my best. Sea breaking open. The night disintegrates over the brightness of the umbrellas, over the countless skins gradually hardened. In the folds of the quivering breeze, air and water are the same. Rushed individuals trampling the perplexed mirrors of the street. Nocturnal light that the gray smoke has replaced. A man's grimace at each corner gathered under a sky collapsed so many times. The child and his smile behind a blue window like the dream of a fish, and above the earth a sea breaking open. Thank you. So I should have said this before. So his first collection, they're all about waters, about like aguas. How does waters kind of go in the exterior? And I think in the second part of the collection, we go sort of the interior. Vale, sigue, ¿no?
Bueno, continuamos con Insomne, según la lista que tenemos por ahí. Dice así: azules sueños cruzan la habitación a oscuras, formando el rostro de las noches en un cielo de humedad. Alimenta el viento la voz del aguacero, surca mis oídos y enardece la tenacidad de mis ideas. Pretendo buscar un cegador momento, o punto ciego en que no acosen más estas paredes, en que no apunten más estas ventanas, como si fuera posible guarecerse de esa sombra, y nunca te enteraras cuánto me acompañas.
Insomniac. Blue dreams cross the room in the dark, forming the face of the nights in a humid sky. The voice of the downpour feeds the winds. It rides through my ears and inflames the tenacity of my ideas. I intend to search for a blinding moment or a blind spot where these walls no longer harass, where these windows no longer point, as if it were possible to shelter from that shadow, and you'd never find out how much you accompany me. Sigue. Sí. Elección.
Bien, elección. Renunciar a ello o salir a confrontar. Calma o tempestad, ocaso o alba. Salir sin saber qué salía ni a qué. Y quién sabe qué fue lo que dejé con mi partida. Porque hoy cada bruma nos roza con sus labios y mañana los hirientes colmillos del sol desgarrarán la inutilidad de los paraguas. Abandonados, sobre este día abandonados, con pies para agrietar la carretera, con palabras para derramar en un cuaderno, con pecados para enterrar bajo los árboles.
Choice. Give it up or go out and confront it. Calm or storm, sunset or dawn. Go out without knowing I was going out or why. And who knows what I left with my departure. Because today every mist rubs with its lips, and tomorrow the hurtful fangs of the sun will tear apart the uselessness of umbrellas. Abandoned, on this day abandoned, with feet to crack the road, with words to spill in a notebook, with sins to bury under the trees. And the next poem begins the second part of the book, Pasillos.
Bueno, pasillos de la pieza. Iré por los pasillos haciendo caso omiso de los charcos transparentes, de las eléctricas guiñadas, de los derruidos calefactores. Cada puerta esconde un mundo, pero no puedo elegir. Apenas un puntapié en alguna de ellas, antes de regresar corriendo y tropezar, chocar, insultar al Dios que sale de los ascensores, con la bolsa de pan y la botella de vino. Mi habitación no tiene descripción ni número, solo un flujo que se escapa por debajo de la puerta.
So the second part of the book, is about, it's called La Pieza, and I initially translated it as the piece, which was erroneous because the La Pieza actually means the room, right? So it's called the room. So in the second part of the book, he's kind of going around different parts of a building, more or less, right? ¿Cómo se...
¿Cómo, perdón? ¿Cómo se describe?
Sí.
En realidad yo ahí juego con la idea, ¿no? de la pieza como una pieza de una cosa más grande, ¿no? Tipo puzzle, ¿no? Pero también con la idea de cuarto, ¿no? Fundamentalmente con la idea de cuarto. Eso era un problema que te tocó ahí lidiar con él, pero creo que lo pudiste resolver muy bien.
So more or less, he's talking about like a room, like where someone inhabits, right? And sort of walking around this building and what you see and what in the ways in which you live. Yeah, is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
But pieza also means piece. I mean,
Okay.
like
So it also like a piece of music.
So he said he understands why you had so much
Yes.
trouble with the word because it's
So there was some trouble with the room because it has a double meaning. Yes. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Sigue. La pieza. Vamos a biblioteca. And this was a word that Miguel invented. Biblioteca, ¿sí? Lo que inventes más o menos, ¿sí? Biblioteca. Okay, so there I was, a translator, alone in my room during COVID, and I was looking for pluvioteca. Like, what is that? What does that mean? And so I'm searching for things, and it turns out he just invented the word, and he invented another word. But luckily, it has a really nice translation.
Exacto, sí. Pluvioteca como una especie de biblioteca de lluvias, ¿no?
A library of rain.
Y obviamente los libros que están en esa biblioteca tienen que ver con ese tema, ¿no?
The book deals with this subject.
Nada te hago roca en el primer estante, junto a Laura y su llamar al agua por su nombre. La Biblia diluvia universal. Llueve en un verso de Pizarnik, en un fragmento de Cortázar, en un poema de Perirossi. No hay polvo, sino gotas y musgo y cañadas intertextuales. Las páginas no se olvidan, se empañan.
Library of rain. So he's talking about different things he has on his shelf with in his library that's, full of rain. Library of rain. Nothing Thigo Roca on the first shelf, with Laura and her calling water by its name. The Bible floods universally. It rains in a verse from Pisnatic, in an excerpt from Cortázar, in a poem by Rossi. There is no dust but drops and moss and intertextual ravines. The pages are not forgotten. They fog up. Okay, the next one is a little strange because I just wanted to do this before we head off because this was this was a challenge in translation. It's called Zoranta Endante, But what's inherent here is that there's a play on words. Like the translation, my translation's fine, but it's it's okay. My translation's fine. It works. But those who speak Spanish know that there's a play on words here, a relationship with the title, and the names that are mentioned. So, how would you describe Zorrita y Dante? ¿Cómo es que explica esto
¿Querés que explique un poquito?
Sí, sí, sí.
Bien, Zurita es un poeta chileno contemporáneo bueno, que me parece que es como uno de los más importantes de la actualidad y hace bastante en realidad. Y bueno, y Dante, todos sabemos quién es Dante. Y bueno, Zurita tiene como un juego permanente en su obra con citar a Dante, con volver a la obra de Dante. Es más, titula muchos de sus libros con los mismos títulos que usó Dante. Por ejemplo, utiliza Purgatorio, Paraíso, ¿no? La vida nueva. Entonces yo quise hacer como en este poema una especie de comunión de juntada entre los dos autores. Y hago un juego de palabras también. Zurita andante es Zurita y Dante, pero también en español es Zurita andando o Zurita escribiendo, ¿no? Tiene ese juego que lo hice para perjudicar a Jona nomás. Pero bueno.
Okay. Well, Zurita is a very important Chilean poet, and but he uses his name often as a play on words, and with Dante, the Italian poet Dante, and so in Spanish, if you say en Dante, you're talking about in Dante, but you're also saying walking or moving forward. So that's one of the.
Bien, dice así, tiene un epígrafe al comienzo que dice, pero pasó que estaba en un baño cuando vi algo como un ángel, que es de Zurita, y el poema empieza así, asciende hacia la luz Zurita andante, pule los escalones Zurita andante, hieda hipoclorito Zurita andante, pantalón con lamparones Zurita andante, divisa el color rojo Zurita andante, lucha con las manchas Zurita andante, y el aliento de los caños Zurita andante. Escribe un poema, Zurita andante, canta a los azulejos, Zurita andante. En el baño de mujeres, Zurita andante, engrameando la tiesta, Zurita andante. Descubre las virtudes, Zurita andante. Ya no tendrá sueños, Zurita andante.
So, Zorrita and Dante. Ascending toward the light, Zorrita walks. Polishing the steps, Zorrita walks. Stinking of Clorox, Zorrita walks. With stained pants, Zorrita walks. Seeing red, Zorrita walks. Fighting with stains, Zorrita walks. And smelling like drains, Zorrita walks. Writing a poem, Zorrita walks. Singing to the tiles, Zorrita walks. In the women's bathroom, Zorrita walks. Shaking his head, Zorrita walks. Discovering virtue, Zorrita walks. No longer dreaming, Zorrita walks. So we have two more poems before we hand it over to Nancy. Jago. So this is kind of one of the, I feel, one of the, of like South American literature in general. It has like a very circular idea of itself and questioning existence and how we write in the circular notion of ourselves.
Bien, hallazgo. Encontré a un hombre que recitaba un poema, de un poemario inconcluso su mejor poema, y vi que mientras lo recitaba lo componía, y sus palabras se escribían en mi cerebro y salían de mi boca y de todos mis gestos, y mi voz resonaba en ese pequeño mundo solitario donde yacía solo mi propio cuerpo, mi sola mente y mi poema, que hablaba sobre un hombre que encontraba a otro que era el mismo, recitando de su inconcluso poemario su mejor poema.
So it's called Found. I found a man who recited a poem from an unfinished book of poems, his best poem. And I saw that while he recited it, he composed it. And his words were written in my brain, and they came out of my mouth and all my gestures. And my voice echoed in that little lonely world where only my own body lay, my lone mind and my poem, that talked about a man who found another, that was himself reciting from his unfinished book of poems, his best poem. And now we'll end with the title poem of the second part called La Pieza, the piece.
Bien, bueno, ya que es la última lectura, ¿no? Aprovecho para agradecer también. Quiero agradecer a todos los presentes, a la librería, bueno, a Caroline, a Caitlin, Jona, por supuesto, todos. Y nada, estoy muy contento de estar acá.
He's very happy to be here. Thanks, everyone. That's my quick translation. Go ahead.
Ok. Bien. Quiero agradecer a Josh Whitlock, mi amigo que me trajo desde Nueva York por acá también. Era una aventura bastante inolvidable.
It's for his friend who's here.
Hace algunos años pinté de gris la habitación. Tallé las gotas con el martillo de Dufresne. Hoy todos los desagües mueren en la ventana sur. Veo el casamiento de los zorros y el cielo de Taylor. Pero también algunas veces, en sonámbulos descuidos, pude ver el sol. Hoy lo tapo con un dedo.
I love this. We recorded this for, I think, the Chicago Review, and he did like a video recording of this. So see, at the end, he says, "Hoy lo tapo con un dedo." So he covers the sun with his finger. It's pretty cool. Okay. The room. Some years ago, I painted the room gray. I carved the drops with the hammer of Dufresne. Today, all the drains die in the south window. I see the wedding of the foxes in the sky of Taylor, but also, sometimes, in sleepwalking carelessness, I could see the sun. Today, I cover it with a finger. Thank you all very much.
Gracias.
Yeah, thank you. And now we welcome the wonderful Nancy Naomi Carlson, who's going to read from Solio. Thank you, Nancy.
I'm not as adept at balancing what I'm reading and then the extra piece of paper and then the glasses changing and what if something falls? And so I feel better here. But I used to be a teacher. Well, I am a professor, but online. But I like being close to the audience, so I wish I could be closer. But imagine me closer. That was a beautiful reading, both of you, a treat. And I have a blurb in the book, so I feel very related to the book and to WWPH with my first book. That was years and years ago. So it was the first of 15 books, and the first book is always the best book. Wonderful feeling for it. Yeah. Well, yeah. So thank you to Caroline, and thank you to Jona for carrying forth the WWPH mission, and thank you to Politics and Prose. Thank you, audience. We couldn't do it without you. And okay, so everybody raised their hand for Spanish. I raised my hand too. How about French? How many French speakers? Yeah, don't be ashamed. There you go. Thank you. And I'm a translator of Francophone, African, and Caribbean poets, mostly. And I tend to translate poets from Djibouti. I try to find the most esoteric place on earth. And I didn't know where Djibouti was. So Djibouti, the Congo, Mauritius, Martinique in the Caribbean. And Samira Negrouche found me, or her publisher did. She's from Algeria. And she lives in Algeria. Everyone else has left their country. They were born in Africa and they're living in Paris or Italy. She stays. And she studied to be a doctor, and she is credentialed to be a doctor. But as she said, she's privileged her career to be writing and translating rather than pursuing medicine. But what's left over for her from her education is that Arabic is the language in Algeria. It used to be a colony of France. So speaking Arabic shows that you are Algerian. You are not French from mainland France, the colonizer. But the schools she attended for medicine were all conducted in French. The other schools are all in Arabic. So she writes in French, but you might say, well, why is she using the language of the colonizer? And she says, she's a doctor, she said it's like being raped and the DNA is still in your body and she has French in her body still. So she writes in French, she translates into French, but into Arabic as well. So I found her, or she found me, because her publisher said, hey, Nancy, Naomi, do you want to translate a few poems for this feature that we're doing on Francophone writers? And I said, sure. And he said, this is Samira Negrouche. And I looked her up, and her translator, everybody's got their translator. So, you know, this writer has this translator, and you don't want to mess with that. So her translator is Marilyn Hacker, who's world renowned. Everyone who's in translating has heard of her. She lives in Paris. She lives the translator's dream. She's won major awards. So I never thought to even go near Samira. But for this feature, Patrick said, I have permission. So I went and co-translated it. Long story short, Patrick teaches at the Sorbonne, and my co-translator, with whom I sometimes translate, was a student of his, but nobody knew everybody knew each other. So then when I mentioned to my co-translator, Patrick, and she said, not mine, Patrick. And so then I thought I had to have her co-translate these poems. So this is going to be the poem that I'm going to read tonight. It's a 6-part poem. And so I did, and then we became friends. And then we agreed that I would translate 2 more of her books, and that we would then have them combined in the book, which is now Solio. We'll talk a little bit about what Solio means, but the 2 books are here, and I generally publish from Calcutta. Seagull Books is in Calcutta, the dirty streets of Calcutta, and you see this dirty building, and you walk in, and there's origami and paintings and books, and they had me come to give a master class in translation. So I got to see them and meet Naveen, the founding editor of Seagull Books. And they are wonderful. And when I first heard of them, I thought, Calcutta, get published there. But they're distributed by the University of Chicago Press. And in the United States, University of Chicago Press has it well covered. So I asked Naveen if he was interested, and he never said no to me. Once he said no to me, but he usually doesn't say no. And he agreed. And the book had some interesting graphics in it. So you'll see here that Shinandini, who is our graphic artist at Seagull, has graced some of the pages with floral designs. And they fit the whole tone of this book. So let's talk about the book. Solio. It's a word that's not French. It's an Esperanto word. It has a number of meanings, and I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget. But in Esperanto, it means threshold, and in Spanish, it's reminiscent of sol, the sun. And it can also mean solium in Latin, meaning seat and throne. And then the West African Clio, before they would tell their tale or sing it, they would say Solio, inviting the audience to hear it. So this poem is part 11 of an 11-part poem, and it was written in collaboration with a choreographer. So Samira and Fatou Cissé, the choreographer, worked together, and they would work independently, they would work together. These poems stand alone, but they're also meant to be done with dancing going on too. And so Solio. All right. I'm going to read just a tiny bit of the French for the first part, and you'll know if you're looking at your clock and going, oh my goodness, how are we doing? Every time I turn a page is 1 part, and so they're very sparse. And the I in the poem is a multitude of eyes representing everyone, universal, genderless, and for Samira, that's very important for her. She can't be herself in Algeria. They have strict rules and laws. And so she has this mysterious eye that walks around the entire globe trying to find oneself. A little French. Dans l'espace entre nous, il y a beaucoup. Il y a ce qui est dit et ce qui ne le sera jamais. Il y a ce qui est écrit et ce qui ne le sera jamais. Il y a ce qui est pensé. Il y a aussi ce qui est négligé. Dans l'espace entre nous, il y a une nuée d'impossibles, comme chant d'oiseaux que nous ne savons pas retranscrire. Il y a le poids du temps. Il y a le poids des histoires que nous ne partageons pas. In the space between us, there's so much. There's what's said and never will be said. There's what's written and never will be written. There's what's thought. There's also what's neglected. In the space between us, there's a cloud of impossibles. Like birdsong, we can't transcribe. There's the weight of time. There's the weight of histories we don't share. In the space between us, there are also the accidents overwhelming us, those that sometimes open a door. We sometimes see this door and sometimes choose to take it. If I speak to you, I speak through what we lack. This lack is our chance, the only true excuse for venturing out on the road. The impulse comes from what we call instinct, virus, inner voice. But isn't what we lack what we most want to make exist? We draw lines where they weigh us down. And because we drew them, now we can erase them, letting the sea return to its peaceful swaying. I came from an earlier time to remind you of the promise of dawn. Every child is a child of the renewed dawn who will teach us again the profound song, the intimate rhythm of ourselves. I came from that time that amasses horizons and sifts through them one by one with care, giving each its measure. I came from the Algiers door to reach the peak of Toubkal. I came from the manuscripts of Timbuktu to bring the word to the sages of Kilimanjaro. I came from the N'Djamena door. I almost got sunstroke in Cotonou. I was madly in love in Zanzibar. I came through the Cape Town door, unable to read the meaning of stars. I dreamt of crossing that triangle that could take me from Cairo to Sagia El Ambra. I entered 100 times through the Gorée door, where I left a rosary of tears. I entered through Gorée, where I tried to come back to life. Solio. I entered through so many doors, passed through so much of myself. Solio. Everywhere I was told about wounds and pardons, those we no longer wait for, those that one day will come, those will pretend not to owe. People often spoke to me straight in the eyes. Solio. I came back from my crossing to tell you my last prayer. Solio. God is a black woman with legs covered in soot. Solio. Make sure to honor these black legs covered in soot. Solio. And so you will be. Thank you. All right. We have question and answer, I think. You gave me 15 minutes. That's it? That's all I got? My time's up?
Yeah, sure. Let's do questions if everybody wants. Yeah, wonderful. Have a seat, have a seat, have a seat. Miguel, Miguel. Miguel. If anybody has any questions about translation or anything, please feel free to ask us. Any questions about the poems or about the books or anything that you have? If not, we're happy to sign. You want me to do this? Should I do a little show? Okay. Yes. Hi. No, I'm going to give you the microphone.
My question's for Miguel. Should I ask it in Spanish? Okay. Do I translate my own question too? Got it. Okay. Great. Okay. Miguel, tengo una pregunta sobre la traducción de sus obras. La poesía, me imagino que escoger cada palabra es como alzar un pincel y pintar. Y decir o dejar que otra persona toque su pintura. ¿Hubo alguna pausa o algún miedo, excitación en ustedes? Decir, tal vez no hagamos esto porque me lo van a echar a perder.
Well, her question was in poetry, each word is very carefully chosen, kind of like with a paintbrush. And did you have any fear when you turn your work over to a translator that the original work will somehow be altered?
Bueno, muchas gracias por la pregunta. Hay un crítico uruguayo que hace traducciones aparte y él dice que traducir es transcrear, es decir, hacer como una obra nueva, ¿no? No es simplemente pasar una cosa de un idioma a otro, ¿no? Sino una nueva creación. Y yo estoy muy de acuerdo con esa idea. No la quiero hacer muy larga porque...
Bueno, okay. Well, there's a famous Uruguayan critic who says that translation is really transcribing. And really, when you translate a poem, you're making a new poem. You're writing something new.
Y bueno, y cuando Jessie Lee, cuando una profesora estadounidense que fue la que me contactó con Jona, me dio esta oportunidad de pasarle mis textos y demás, muy rápidamente sentí como mucha confianza en el trabajo de Jona, rápidamente. Y él muchas veces me preguntaba por WhatsApp, por ejemplo, cuando tenía alguna duda. Yo trataba de responder lo más rápido que podía. Pero miedos, la verdad que no. Sabía que igual no iba a quedar, pero quizás hasta podía quedar mejor. Así que...
So he said that when Jesse Lee introduced them, he immediately felt confidence in Jonah and his translation. And he consulted him all the time through WhatsApp. And so he felt that they were always collaborating. And he said, I think maybe sometimes he made the poem better.
I have a question just about the translation process. Imagining there's an ideal process when you have access to the living person and you could talk to them. I'm wondering if you ideally talk to the person in advance and not only read the poems, but hear from them what they intended to say, or maybe little secret meanings embedded and such. Yeah, just to hear more about what's ideal. And then when you can't do the ideal, maybe what you do instead.
So they want me to answer that, so I will. Dead people are easiest to translate. They are not there. They're not going to give you a hard time. Los muertos. They don't say anything is wrong, but you almost have more of an ethical obligation to them because they can't speak for themselves. So I started, my first translation was René Chao, who was not alive, and I was really anxious about it, that I owed him, but his work was so mysterious, and nobody really knew what he was saying. So I did the best I could. And then I switched to live writers. Some of them are like, just do it, I don't care, just translate. Some are like, let me know your questions, and then you'd send the questions, and they would send it back PDF so that you would not touch what they had put in as what would be the right thing. And this, for a novel, is rather difficult to deal with. Most of my authors are fairly laid back. They trust me, and you have to build trust. If they never met me before, why should they trust me and what I'm going to do, especially if they don't speak English that well? So by building my career is, my day job is I'm a counselor. And so I know the importance of trust in a counseling relationship. No one's going to hear anything you have to say unless they trust you. And so to me, I spend the first part building that trust. And then when I ask a question, they know it's coming from a good place. And they are wonderful as far as answers. Did you mean, when it's a word like the pieza thing with the room and the piece? Did you mean that, or did you mean both? And then that becomes a conundrum in translation to get both meanings in there with the wordplay. Or maybe they just meant one thing. So this back and forth is important to me. And surely before any book is published, I have to make sure they at least have a chance to look at the whole thing and have any comments if they want me. Did I get something wrong? Is there something better? And the last thing I'll say is when I first started with my third person that I translated, I showed him, we were applying for a grant, and I showed him my 10 pages. And I said, we need this. It's a rush. We got to have it done. And he said, I think you can do better. And René Chal wasn't there to tell me that I could do better, so he pushed me. And then I was able to push myself to do better.
I'll just say there were a few things, the different poems that I asked Miguel por WhatsApp. Conversamos. We did a lot of conversation for WhatsApp. Different words, vaquero, por ejemplo, or there were many different words. And Kathleen helped us to some just different words. They had to just make sure they were in the correct word for the correct context. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Hi, how are you? Yeah. Congratulations to all the translators and the poet. I'm sure the three of you are poet. I mean, I know you're poet too. Yes. And mi pregunta es para ti, Miguel. Quería saber cuáles son tus influencias literarias porque me han gustado mucho tus poemas.
¿Entendiste la pregunta?
Sí.
Ah, sí.
Gracias. Bueno.
That's what happens. Like you get these two languages, and it's like,
yes, of course he understood. Yes, the question was, Miguel, who are your literary influences?
Bueno, muchas gracias. Es una pregunta un poco complicada porque cada vez que la respondo como que le cambio algo, pero hay mucha influencia de Borges, de Jorge Luis Borges, Octavio Paz, el mexicano. Hace poco me daba cuenta que también la poesía de Paul Auster, el novelista de Nueva York, que murió hace poco, también como que muy, muy importante en mi poesía. Y después hay un montón de poetas y escritores que siempre están rondando en mi cabeza. Y si bien creo que no se nota en lo que hago o en mi estilo, seguramente aportaron algo, ¿no? Algo quizás invisible, ¿no? Hay una ensalada de cosas que están como aportando a mi poesía, y no solo literatura, también, perdón, muy largo, también cine, también pintura, también música, ¿no? Todo eso está jugando como influencias, ¿no? Perdón, Kathleen.
Well, his two principal influences are Borges and Octavio Paz. Is that what you said? Yeah. And also the American novelist Paul Auster, who died recently. And then there are just a lot of other poems and writers that it just sort of makes a salad of influences and ideas. And he said also other things influence him. Paintings and film and other kinds of art are also influencing his poetry.
Thank you. Merci, gracias. This is such a beautiful evening, and I'm so grateful to be here tonight. I have the great fortune of teaching ESL at Montgomery College with Jona, who's one of my favorite colleagues. And my question relates to decolonization. I teach English, I used to teach French, and I often grapple with the ethics of Englishes and Frenches and Spanishes, right? In one way, when I think about teaching ESL, it's like this lingua franca, it's this tool that we can use to communicate and expand, and this is why it's so wonderful we have these translations. But I also think about the ethics of what you brought up about what does it mean to be colonized by someone else and have that language in you and have that be your language. And I think I'm wondering when these translations were taking place, if you had questions about which Spanish, which French, which English.
Nancy, go ahead.
Thanks a lot. Well, I used to teach ESOL in public schools. So it's a good question, and a lot of times I can rely on how the author says it and the context the author uses to give me a sense, is this going to be the intent? Is this an in-your-face condemnation of the colonizer? Is it a subtle condemnation that we're going to get it there for people who know, but it's going to slip under the radar of people? Is it not there because they're more interested in the philosophical, metaphysical themes? But you have to know the country, and you have to know where the roots of the author lie. Even if they're living a good life in Milan, they can't go back to their country. In Congo Brazzaville, my Alain Mabonkou, who was a Booker finalist with his fiction. Everyone loves his fiction. Nobody knew his poetry, so I am his translator in poetry. He can't go back. He's persona non grata. So part of him probably doesn't really care what they think of him because he's publishing these things critical. But then part of him does, in that's where he was born. That's where his mother lived until she died. And so you have to do research, or I do research to find out about the country, understand where that language is coming from, what they want me to say in English, and then of course running it by them. Do you really mean to have, there was one thing which is, there was a line, Dieu nous tourne le dos. And it could mean God turns his back on us, or it could mean God turns away from us. And I didn't want to put something down there unless I knew what Alain meant. So over lunch in LA in a cafe where I made him meet me, we went through all my questions, and that was one. And he wanted it to be turn his back. And there's such a subtle difference there, but an important difference that I want to know, have I done everything possible to understand and to translate the word to the best of my ability? Sometimes I can't, because sometimes it needs a P alliteration and has to be two stress and end with a slant rhyme. But I still want to do the best I can possibly do.
That's a great answer, Nancy. Thank you. I studied Spain Spanish. I studied in Spain, Salamanca, estudiado Salamanca, más o menos, que all my teachers have been Spain Spanish. So I've been to Argentina. I've not been to Uruguay, but I'm going to try to go in diciembre, es posible, in Uruguay. So early on, I didn't think too much about the actual specifics of the country and the differences in Spanish, but later on in the different editions and the revisions, I did. And I would ask Miguel over WhatsApp to record his voice so I could hear that accent, which is very different than what I learned. If you heard it here, un acento, Uruguayan accent. So I tried to honor that in the rhymes, the different slant rhymes. And also, thanks to Kathleen and another editor that read through it, who's from Uruguay, I was able to catch some of the different connotations and meaning. But it's a really important question. Yeah, as a colonized language, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Heather. One more? Any other questions? We good? Yeah. All right, we're on time. Thank you all so much. Muchas gracias a todos. Thank you. Muchas gracias. We're happy to sign some books up here if you would like.